Welcome back to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, we drift quietly into the shadowed marble halls of Constantinople, the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire. Empire not of conquest, but of continuity, of scrolls, of saints, and of soft-footed messengers delivering bad news in triplicate. This episode is not about war, nor about glorious battles or flaming ships. Instead, we'll turn our attention to the quieter corners, the creaking of papyrus, the scratching of styluses, and the thousand tiny crises of imperial paperwork. We'll walk alongside minor clerks, trying not to be noticed and not to go mad. We'll watch a once powerful empress fade beneath velvet and scandal. We'll descend into the hidden corridors of a cathedral older than memory. And we'll finally sit very still inside a palace built for gods, but ruled by ghosts. So let your shoulders drop, let your breathing slow, and join me as we tiptoe through time back to a world of flickering oil lamps, whispered betrayals, and the slow unraveling of an empire that refused to admit it was dying. This is Boring History for Sleep, and you're exactly where you need to be. Imagine, if you will, the soft gray of an overcast dawn spilling over the sloped rooftops of Constantinople. The distant gulls circle above the Sea of Marmara, their cries muffled by the thick stone walls of a modest home tucked somewhere behind the outer layers of the imperial complex. Within that small room, bare but clean window shutters, slightly ajar, you stir beneath a threadbare blanket. You are a minor official in the Byzantine bureaucracy, not a powerful one, not even an especially useful one, but still a speck in the great administrative machine that keeps the crumbling remnants of Roman glory stumbling forward. Your title might sound impressive on paper: notarios, chartularios, grammaticos. But in truth, your duties consist of reviewing tax records for inconsistencies that might displease your superior, or worse, the emperor himself. You answer to a logothete whose moods shift like the Bosphorus tides, and whose favor is as difficult to read as the emperor's newly minted decrease, penned in ceremonial purple ink and couched in endless flourishes. You rise before the church bells sound, before the vendors shout their morning offerings of dried figs and goat's cheese. The air is cool, stale. It smells faintly of wax and mold. You rub the sleep from your eyes, reach for the basin, and splash your face with water that has sat overnight. No servants, no attendants, that is, for the dignitaries, the sebastoi, the wealthy courtiers with silk robes and enough coin to bribe their way out of real responsibility. You, on the other hand, live frugally. Bread that's a day old, cheese that's nearly translucent, a scrap of dried plum wrapped in cloth. You dress yourself in the drab olive tunic, denoting your rank standard issue, already patched twice at the hem. Over it, a belt of twisted wool. Your sandals are worn. The heel clicks awkwardly as you walk. The path to your bureau is quiet, stone-paved and lined with fig trees, their branches heavy but out of reach. You pass beggars, heads bowed, some whispering prayers in Greek, others in Armenian. A widow clasps a wooden cross. A child plays with a reed flute beside a cistern. When you reach the building, its facade cracked but stately, you step inside a world of controlled chaos. The Bureau of Petitions, or perhaps the Office of Naval Accounts. They all blur together after a time. The interior is dimly lit, just one candle per desk, its wax pooled like frozen tears. There's a constant rustle of parchment, the whisper of sand scattered across drying ink. the scent of vellum, of mildew, and human sweat. You sit, you do not speak, no one does, not unless required. A junior official made a joke, once a harmless observation about the prodros tripping over his robe in the hippodrome. He was reassigned to a post in the mountains of Cilicia. You haven't heard from him since. So, you write. Hours pass in repetition. You draft appeals from merchants fined for supposed contraband. You review tax records scrawled by frightened villagers. You transcribe edicts whose meanings shift depending on who is in power that week. You make 2 copies of everything, sometimes 3, always with precision, always with care. You must choose your phrasing carefully. The empire is filled with shadows informants, secretaries, jealous colleagues. A poorly phrased memorandum could suggest disloyalty. A misplaced phrase in a report could imply criticism. So you hedge, you soften, you use passive voice. It has been noted instead of I noticed, with the greatest respect, instead of this is foolish. And still, each morning, you whisper a prayer as you seal your work, that your handwriting won't be misread, that your signature won't draw attention. Lunch is modest. A slice of barley bread, a handful of olives, and a few sips of thin wine. You eat at your desk. Silence is maintained even in hunger. Somewhere outside, a procession passes by, perhaps a relic being moved from one chapel to another, carried beneath a silk canopy while barefoot priests chant in a minor key. You dare not leave your station to look. With you mustn't appear idle. Afternoon brings a new stack of scrolls, one from the Ministry of Finance, another from the ecclesiastical court. You note the seal of a bishop whose name you dare not pronounce aloud. You feel your temples tighten. You long for quiet, real quiet. Not the nervous hush of this room, but the kind found in the countryside where the only sound is wind through the olive groves, or the chirp of a lark above a vineyard wall. But that world is not for you. You are bound here by duty, by poverty, by fear. As the sun begins to fall behind the dome of Hagia Sophia, golden light creeps across your desk. You pause briefly to stretch your aching fingers. You wonder if you'll be permitted to leave at dusk, or if another petition will arrive, marked urgent and impossible. By the time you return home, if you return home, it will be dark. Your supper, if it's still waiting, will be cool. The oil lamp will flicker. You will read by its trembling light the Psalms of David or the poetry of Gregory of Nazianzus, just enough to remind yourself that there is still some beauty in the world, even if it hides beneath layers of parchment and protocol. You blow out the lamp, and tomorrow you'll do it all again. The empire endures, not because of its emperors, but because of men like you, tired, careful, anonymous, preserving Byzantium one careful line at a time. Now, let us drift a little deeper into the heart of the Palacinta, polished marble corridors and perfumed rooms where the air is thick, not with dust and ink, but with incense, jasmine oil, and whispers. Imagine, if you will, the Empress at twilight. Her name is Zoe, born of the imperial line, daughter of Emperor Constantine VIII. She was not raised like a common girl, but groomed slowly, carefully to be an ornament of the empire. Her hands never scrubbed stone, her feet never touched bare soil. And yet, for all the silk that clothed her and the gold that glittered in her halls, she was never free. The tale of Empress Zoe is not one of sweetness or serenity. It is a tale of candles lit against darkness, of veils and veiled intentions, of power constrained and power unleashed. At the time of her ascent, the Byzantine Empire was more shadow than sun, clinging to ceremony while decay crept in from the corners. Yet within the walls of the great palace in Constantinople, Zoe lived in a world preserved like amber. She was nearly 50 when she was finally allowed to marry Romanos III, a scholarly man more interested in tax reform than romance. Theirs was not a marriage of the heart, it was a political nata, binding of lineage and protocol. Romanos, eager to control his new wife, underestimated her patience, her mind, and her bloodline. Imagine the Empress, seated in a high-backed chair in her mosaic-lined chamber. Her attendants apply rosewater to her temples. Her eyes are calm but calculating. She has known restriction all her life now. Given a sliver of power, she holds it with a quiet ferocity. Romanos proved disappointing in every sense, distracted by finance, detached in affection, and publicly known to favor his mistress. He forbade Zoe from adopting a child to secure the dynasty. He treated her, history whispers, with coldness unbefitting an empress. And so Zoe began to act. At court, favors shifted like the sea breeze. Courtiers flitted from one noble to the next. Monks murmured about heavenly omens, but Zoe remained, still watching, listening, planting seeds. She took a lover, Michael, handsome, ambitious, and pliable. With whispered promises and careful flattery, she positioned him like a chess piece upon the board. Her husband Romanos III drowned, quite suddenly, in a bath. Some said it was an accident. Others did not. In the flickering torchlight of the imperial chapel, Michael was crowned Michael IV. Zoe stood beside him, as serene as ever. She had not wept for Romanos. She wore no black, only crimson and gold. Yet her triumph was not eternal. Michael, for once charming, grew distant. Illness seized his body, and suspicion clouded his thoughts. He grew paranoid, surrounded himself with guards, and kept Zoe away from the affairs of state. The Empress, once again, was locked in her own palace this time, not by marble walls, but by neglect. Still, Zoe endured. When Michael IV died, she tried again. She adopted his nephew and made him emperor as Michael V. For a brief moment, she believed she would reclaim her voice. But the new emperor, young and afraid of her influence, had her banished, dragged from the palace, stripped of title and luxury, sent to a monastery, her name smeared and nearly erased. But Constantinople remembered. The people rioted. The streets shook with fury. Zoe, Zoe, they cried, until the very stones seemed to echo her name. Faced with revolt, Michael V fled. Zoe returned, not just as consort, but as co-empress, ruling with her sister Theodora, two imperial women, side by side on the throne. It was a rare, radiant moment in Byzantine history. And yet, even that triumph was not free from shadows. Intrigues continued. Plots unfolded like parchment scrolls across the court. In time, Zoe would marry once more, taking Constantine IX as her third husband. Together they reigned as figureheads, their power diluted by ministers and factions. Zoe spent her final years tending gardens, experimenting with alchemy, and breathing in the quiet, perfumed dusk of a palace that had seen too much. She died in 1050, at the age of 72. Imagine her, now, at rest in the vast silence of the Church of the Holy Apostles. The candles flicker beside her sarcophagus. The air is still. The whispers are gone. Her life, more drama than many epics, has settled into legend. not with the thunder of conquest or war, but with the rustle of silk, the clink of jewelry, and the soft fall of footsteps behind palace walls. Now we lower our voices further, almost to a whisper, and turn our thoughts to a structure that stood then as it still stands now, merely as a building, but as a presence, Hagia Sophia. Imagine yourself walking toward it in the soft morning light of Constantinople. The city is waking, birds flutter along the rooftop eaves, and the air carries the scent of sea salt from the Bosphorus mixed with the faint warmth of wood smoke. Hagia Sophia rises before you, vast and domed, as though the sky has been tethered to earth. Its massive doors are made of oak and bronze, cold to the touch. You step inside, and a hush greets you thick, like velvet. Light spills through the high windows and catches particles of dust in its golden beams. The floor is worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Voices echo gently through the great dome above, where mosaics shimmer faintly, catching angles of sun. But today, we don't linger in the main hall. Instead, imagine descending beneath the marble floors, beneath the altar and its hidden reliquaries. Below the marble columns, looted from Ephesus and Baalbek, lie the substructures, ancient, unseen, and mostly forgotten. These are the tunnels of Hagia Sophia, whispered about more than understood, winding through history with quiet persistence. Many of them were built as service corridors, hidden passageways for priests, deacons, and imperial functionaries to move unseen. Others, perhaps older, connect cisterns, crypts, and secret storerooms. Some say they were designed for escape, for smuggling relics during sieges, or even for accessing hidden chambers where only the most trusted could enter. Archaeologists have found narrow shafts that descend into cisterns lined with brick and mortar, echoing with trickling water. Moisture beads along the stone like tears, frozen in time. Roots snake through cracks in the ceiling. In places, the tunnels are barely wide enough for a grown man to pass. In others, they open into larger chambers, where a faint shimmer of torchlight might once have reflected off stagnant water. Legend adds shadows where history ends. Some whisper that there are steps carved by hand that lead down into the deep foundations of the basilica steps, so worn they seem melted, their purpose lost. Others say a tunnel leads directly to the great palace, or even across the old city walls to secret docks on the Golden Horn. One tale speaks of a monk who vanished into the earth, seeking solitude for divine visions never to return. Another tells of a last emperor waiting in slumber below the church, hidden until Byzantium rises once more. In truth, many of the tunnels have collapsed or remain sealed. During the Ottoman period, Hagia Sophia became a mosque, and access to many underground areas was walled off. In modern times, only fragments have been explored. Cameras catch glimpses of narrow stone hallways, littered with dust, animal bones, or crumbling timber. But these aren't stories of spectacle, they are echoes. The tunnels remind us that this great structure was not just a place of worship, but a fortress, a stage, and a sanctuary. People hid here, prayed here, fled through here. Imagine a deacon in the 8th century carrying a manuscript down a narrow corridor, fleeing the iconoclast patrols, or a priest in the 10th century hurrying with candles to a private altar in the dark. Or, centuries later, an Ottoman caretaker pausing at the edge of a sealed passage, feeling a cold breeze emerge from deep within. The air down here is cooler. Still, you hear only your own breathing. The outside world fades into silence. And so, we ascend again, slowly and quietly, as though emerging from a dream. The great dome greets us once more. The mosaics shimmer above. The light feels warmer now, and the dust in its beams floats gently, like memory itself. Imagine yourself now walking a short distance from Hagia Sophia through a quiet courtyard of fig trees and crumbling columns until you reach the outer wall of the great palace of Constantinople. Once the heart of imperial life, now mostly forgotten beneath the dust of centuries. Though little remains above ground today, in its time, the palace complex stretched along the cliffs above the Sea of Marmara. A sprawling collection of gilded halls, mosaic courtyards, secret gardens, and winding passageways. Step inside not through the public gates used by petitioners and guards, but through the side entrance reserved for those with titles and silence. The hush deepens. You are in the world of the emperors. The floor beneath your feet is tiled in intricate designs. Dolphins, vines, imperial insignias, each tile hand-placed, each corridor lined with polished marble. At the center of the palace stands the chrysotriclinos, the golden reception hall. Imagine the low, flickering light of oil lamps reflecting off gilded mosaics and enamel panels, creating a quiet shimmer across the vaulted ceiling. Everything here is hushed luxury. Gold, yes, but softened gold, not gaudy. Draped silks hang from tall frames. Incense wafts from censers. Eunuchs pass without a sound, trained from youth to be discreet, emotionless, always present, and never quite there. It is the pinnacle of status, and also its prison. The Emperor Augustus, Basileus, lives in splendor, but also in shadow. Every movement is watched, every phrase calculated. The walls themselves have ears. Even the imperial meals are rituals. The silver bowls, the ivory spoons, the ceremonial bread. You do not eat to nourish, but to be seen, to display control, etiquette, and approval. Beneath the golden dome, even digestion becomes a form of governance. Conversations unfold in whispers. One wrong glance may mean exile, or worse. To be an imperial consort or court scholar in this space is to float in beauty and anxiety. You may pass entire weeks without leaving the compound. You walk carefully, speak cautiously, dream in fragments. In the winter months, the sea wind creeps through the shuttered windows. You wrap yourself in velvet robes and sit beside a brazier, reading theological treatises or watching the water beyond the terrace, gray and endless. Outside, the empire shifts, rebellions simmer, provinces groan under taxes. But here, the air is still, almost too still, and in that stillness grows isolation. You might wonder, how did anyone sleep in such a place? How did they rest beneath so much expectation, surrounded by walls that reflected power but gave no warmth? Perhaps they found comfort in routine, in the predictability of ritual, in the dim light of the same corridor at dawn, in the soft steps of the same silent attendant, in the constancy of incense and the rhythm of bells and the echo of prayers rising from Hagia Sophia just beyond the garden wall. And perhaps, eventually, even emperors longed for simpler things, wind through an olive grove, the laughter of children far from protocol, or the freedom to walk unnoticed. The palace, in all its wealth, was a sanctuary, but also a cage made of silk and gold. And so we leave it now, softly closing the inlaid doors behind us. The sun has dipped lower, casting long shadows over the tiled courtyards and domed halls. The rhythm of their lives, measured, controlled, and quietly tense, fades into the hush of evening. You've walked today not in the footsteps of emperors alone, but in the sandals of scribes and servants, rebels and rulers, through dim halls and dusty corridors, where time lingers like incense. You've traced the life of a lowly clerk whose days were filled with ink and suspicion, wandered the precarious rise and fall of Empress Zoe, crept through the stone veins beneath Hagia Sophia, and stood in quiet awe amid the flickering golden silence of the great palace. Each layer of Byzantium reveals a paradox, grandeur paired with fear, ritual masking fragility, power crumbling softly under the weight of too many expectations. And now, here you are, not in Constantinople, not under domes or behind mosaic-covered walls, but in your own quiet space, with only the hum of the present around you. Let yourself sink into that quiet. Let the candlelight of the past dim gently. The empire has faded. The scribes have stopped writing. The garden party has ended. Even the eunuchs have withdrawn to their chambers. What remains is stillness, and in that stillness, perhaps a kind of peace, not the kind found in decrees or conquests, but the kind found in understanding, in seeing the world as it once was, complex, flawed, strangely beautiful, and knowing that it too has passed. Sleep well, traveler. Tomorrow we may drift through Edo, or row with the Vikings, or whisper with the pharaohs. But tonight, Constantinople sleeps, and so should you.